Hello and welcome to another Why It Matters episode of The Living Philosophy. Today we're going to be talking about the most recent video on the channel, the Why Feminism Hasn't Happened Yet, or the distinction between womanism and feminism. And for those of you who are new to the channel, this is a Why It Matters video, which means it's a reaction to a previous video. So you might get a little bit lost if you haven't seen that video, so you might want to go back and check out the video on Why Feminism Hasn't Happened Yet. With the regular videos, I try and stay out of it as much as possible. I try and present the material just as it is. But with these Why It Matters videos, I'm trying to do a few things. So part of it is kind of responding to comments and things that have updated my knowledge since I published the video. And another key theme is just how it relates to my philosophy as a whole, and why the video topic is important to me and what it's done to kind of shape my view of the world. So that's kind of what we're in for today. And today we're talking about the Why Feminism Hasn't Happened Yet. So this was a really interesting video to make. It was really challenging because on the one hand, I'm a white guy talking about feminism. So that's yeah, especially with what the nature of what I'm saying, that it's not necessarily just an objective recording of what has happened with feminism, but a sort of a reorientation or a proposed reorientation of it. So I felt very vulnerable and quite perfectionistic about like, okay, I gotta be mindful of like what I'm saying here, and like trying to be aware of as many pitfalls as possible that I could fall into. So there was a lot of writing and rewriting the script and that was on the writing side. And on the other side, I've been learning a new editing program, so Adobe After Effects, because I'm trying to take the video production to the next level. And with the 4 quadrants video a couple of months ago, it was just, I put so much work into doing stuff in the program that I usually use, which is Premiere Pro, and I was just like, there's got to be an easier way to do this kind of stuff. And I'd known a little bit about After Effects before, but a lot of the time working on this video was me just watching tutorial after tutorial of like, okay, how could I do that? Can I do that? Oh, I can. Okay, yeah. So I've kind of been learning a new program while I was doing it. So I was working on the script, trying to like mess around with the visuals for that. And then I was like off watching tutorials, learning more. So yeah, it was kind of it was quite a long, it basically took all the time that I was in Crete to make this video, and which was good. It was an education, and it was good, nice, challenging video to make. So it was a lot of fun, but it was definitely it was definitely quite challenging. But yeah, like the comments that came in afterwards, yeah, you've said amazing things. Like a lot of them really insightful, and a lot of them really just really cool to get the feedback back and be like, okay, that wasn't. I didn't completely mess it up, so that's quite reassuring. So yeah, it was an interesting creative process. Of course, the major oversight in the video was the fact that there is already something out there called womanism. So with that central distinction for me between womanism and feminism, of like womanism relating to women, feminism relating to the feminine, that seemed like a very clean distinction in my mind. But yeah, already you've got the way I'm rebranding traditional feminism as womanism, and then so you got me using feminism, and then you've got traditional feminism, and then you layer on top of this, you've got these two movements within feminism. If you've already got a feminism and a womanism, so terminologically speaking, not the clearest territory to be navigating. But yeah, so apparently there was already a womanism movement out there that aligned with a lot of what I was calling feminism, or like neo-feminism, that I was proposing. So I had to go off and research this, because I was like, oh, that would be too kind of like weird if it was just a complete mirror thing. So I went off and looked at it, and yeah, it turns out in the late 70s, a theorist called Alice Walker wrote a short story in which she coined this term womanism. And having only read a tiny bit about it, I don't really feel comfortable being like, this is what womanism is. But just from my readings of it, it seems that like it's a movement that developed in the African American community of women. So they were kind of falling between pillar and post. So there's this great book title, All the Women Are White, All the Blacks Are Men, But Some of Us Are Brave. So it's this kind of thing of like, the feminism movement was particularly centered on white females, and the civil rights movement, I guess the movement against racism, was more centered on black males. So the thing with, yeah, even with like the first wave feminism with the suffragettes, they kind of refused to admit black women into their ranks because they were like, well, no, this isn't about that. It's about women. And so, yeah, there was this exclusionary thing. And yeah, so womanism is kind of a movement that is, in the beginning anyway, it's to do with kind of finding this place for African American women, or finding a movement that is more centered on them. But then I don't know whether this is a later development, or again, there's only so much research I've done in it. I'd need to do a deep dive to fully understand it, but I'm not sure whether this is other thinkers. It even seems like Alice Walker's thoughts on womanism changed over time. But you have this idea that it's a universalist movement as well. So it's a more and more inclusionary movement, rather than just being like feminism for white women, civil rights movement, or anti-racism movement for black men. So yeah, it's trying to find it's an intersectionality kind of thing, and then it's for everyone, I guess, somehow. So yeah, it's a little bit confusing for me, but I guess that universalist aspect is probably where it overlaps with what I'm talking about with feminism. Interestingly enough, though, so this womanist thing has become its own movement, and there's a lot of like scholarship around it. But this scholarship has been criticized because there's not enough representation of LGBTQ stuff in it. So that's, I don't know, it's really interesting when you create a movement that's trying to like be more inclusive, and then it's just got to be more, and it's not like it's saying anything bad about LGBTQ, but just that there's not enough scholarship within the womanist scholarship about LGBTQ stuff. So yeah, it's really interesting. I won't go too much into that there, but just curious to see just the troubles with intersectionality, and would need to cover all your bases. And this is kind of why I felt very vulnerable in making the video in the first place, because I was like, oh, I'm definitely going to trip over some tripwire here and say something wrong. And yeah, so let's look at just a few quotes from the Wikipedia page about womanism, and there's a few interesting quotes there. So one of them from womanist scholar Layli Maparian, who says that womanism seeks to restore the balance between people and the environment/nature, and reconcile human life with the spiritual dimension. And then there's Alice Walker, who's the woman, again, who originally coined the term with a short story back in the late 70s. And she's talking about this garden in which all the different flowers bloom equally. So the article says, a womanist is committed to the survival of both males and females, and desires a world where men and women can coexist while maintaining their cultural distinctiveness. The inclusion of men provides black women with an opportunity to address gender oppression without directly attacking men. So yeah, that's an interesting, it's a different spin on feminism yet again. So it's really distinct from what I meant by womanism and feminism, because obviously I was coming at it more from a place of like almost just this Jungian or spiritual distinction between the masculine and feminine, and the male and the female. So yeah, it's coming at it more from this intersectionality, this evolution out of feminism into something new. But then you can see this conflict within feminism of like feminism being so anti-men, or like men are the enemy, which is the idea we looked at in the video with like the patriarchy as being a thing of men. So obviously for African American women, there's going to be a slightly different spin on this, because it's like, well, there's white people oppressing black people, and then there's men oppressing women. So it's not as simple as saying that it's men oppressing women, which is something that you might have the clarity with as a white woman. So yeah, that's really interesting, but it's how it leads into this more spiritual dimension, and seeing that again, that move towards nature, that move towards this more encompassing kind of thing. So yeah, there's definitely overlap there, and it's really interesting to see that is a movement. So yeah, that's it was a complete oversight on my part of making the video. And it's just I guess it's one good thing about making videos is I get to learn quicker. So you get people pointing out your the things you've missed, even when they're this obvious. So yeah, it's really interesting, and that's something I might research more in future. Definitely would like to research more feminism, because yeah, it's an interesting topic, especially because it's so charged these days. So yeah, definitely something to explore. So that was like the first major learning since making the video. The other big thing to come out of the video for me was in a comment thread with Aaron Latif, and he was kind of making the point about feminism having already happened, or the feminine as already taken over society in some way and having transformed the culture in the last 50 years. And yeah, this was something that I'd overlooked, and I've made videos in the past about the coming out of Robert Bly's mythopoetic kind of work, in the Jungian tradition, Iron John, which is a book about masculinity, a book about men and what it is to be a man. He was kind of writing this in the early 90s, and this was the beginning of the men's movement, which, interestingly enough, is where the term toxic masculinity came from. Just kind of got kind of turned against the tradition then at later times. But yeah, so Robert Bly talks in Iron John about the three ages of man. You've got the red knight, the white knight, and the black knight. And this is something I made a video on just over a year ago. And the red knight is kind of the man and the fullness of masculinity, and like the stereotypical like teenage boy who's just like so risk-taking, impulsive, and kind of hard to control, and a little bit wild. So that's like the red knight. And then the stereotypical red knight who in time developmentally evolves into the white knight, and the white knight is the stereotype of the white knight is this much more controlled kind of, I think of Red Foreman when I think of like the developed white knight, of like someone who's an upholder of the status quo, someone who is just a bastion of like, this is the system and this is what you have to obey. And it's the white knight trying to tame the red knights and trying to be like, here, these are the rules, you better follow them. So yeah, that's the like classical white knight who eventually evolves into the black knight, which we won't talk about here, but it's more of it's like a loosening of the rules, and not being so bound to the laws as the white knight is, and having more compassion, having more heart. So yeah, but what's interesting is that like Robert Bly talks about this in the book, that there's been an evolution since the 60s into this emergence of the white knight as the nice guy, as like, I guess you think the simp, and then the incel of just like, well, not so much the incel has gotten the dark again, but the white knight as this, just this nice guy thing of like having skipped the red knight. And Robert Bly puts it down to our culture having given us messages that those aspects of masculinity are not good, and we should completely get rid of those and get them under control. So that we've ended up with generations of men who are disconnected from that masculinity, from that raw red knight energy. And so you end up with this kind of like premature white knight kind of thing. So this nice guy, and this is something that's it's a really common trope now in the culture, in movies and in TV shows, of just like the nice guy who just cannot really get what he wants in the world, doesn't have assertiveness, and women do not find him attractive. So it's that cultural trend that in turn has led to counter trends like the pickup artistry movement, and then you go further along that continuum, you get the red pill, the men going their own way, MGTOW, and then you've got the incel movement kind of at the last stop on the rail. So yeah, it's this interesting thing of like, these are the red pill and the pickup artistry movement are ways of getting these nice guys, these white knights, to connect into that red knight energy. And kind of the first big book in that space was Neil Strauss's The Game, which is very much this fairy tale version of this narrative of, you got this typical white knight, and he goes into this pickup artistry movement, they're all in these chat rooms sharing different techniques, different openers, and then he goes through it, he learns all the tricks, integrates his red knight, has amazing experiences, and then at the end he comes out the other side in a committed relationship with this woman, and he's integrated that red knight and has moved forward again into white knight. So yeah, it's that's like the fairy tale version, but of course, yeah, the more you study that community, and especially when it goes into like red pill and then into the black pill of the incels, that's like that is the fairy tale version, and that's not usually what happened. But I guess development is messy and non-linear. So yeah, it's really interesting that there's that whole trend that I hadn't really thought about when I was making the video, even though that's something that I've studied a lot in the past and something that I've made videos about. So yeah, it's really interesting to think of how masculinity is already like culturally on the back foot. And then yeah, in this comment thread there was a really interesting back and forth. So Aaron Latif kind of saying yeah that this feminism was kind of like really moved forward in that cultural domain, even if masculinism still holds in the working domain. And then Joy M was kind of responding, saying that yeah, maybe the content is changed, but the structure is the same. So yeah, it would be fascinating to try and tease apart what exactly is going on there. And something that comes to mind is like a Q3 versus Q4 difference, but I don't know. I don't really understand it fully yet, but it's definitely, you can see that there's been a cultural shift towards feminine values, but then it's like the ruling power, this ruling structure is still very much this this old school patriarchal, like masculine values are what win out there, or masculine qualities are what dominate in that sphere. So yeah, it's a much more nuanced story than I presented in the video, and that's it's really fascinating to think about. So I think this is a topic I'll be returning to more in future, because it's so rich and it's so relevant to see what's going on in the world right now through this lens. So yeah, I guess that's everything for this episode of The Living Philosophy. I'd like to thank Shane, Croissant Eater, Robert, and all the other patrons for the incredible support and for making all of this possible. If you want to support the channel, you can head over to Patreon, where you get access to monthly Q&As, to different goodies, as well as I'm going to be releasing more regular videos over there, just maybe once a week, having an extra video in the style of the 100 days videos. So that should be starting next week. And yeah, you can get your name in the credits like these people. And if you have any other thoughts, insights, or feedback, I'd love to hear from you down in the comments. Otherwise, I shall see you next time. Thank you for watching.